What's going on, everyone? I'm back, and today we're going to be talking Lamar Miller. Everything from expectations for his 2018 season to looking at some of his previous stats in the last couple of years, also including how to evaluate him when it comes to draft time. And ultimately, I'm going to try and do the impossible, and that is persuade you guys to give him one last chance this year. When talking Lamar Miller, a good place to start is by looking at his last couple of years since he joined the Houston Texans in 2016. And if you guys remember, prior to the start of that season, Lamar Miller was being talked about as a big name that could potentially be a top 10 running back. And obviously, things didn't work out that way. And we could see that, his value has been falling little by little from year to year. And looking at that 2016 season, however, a little bit more carefully as far as stats go, we can kind of see the breakdown here because he still did have over 1,000 yards rushing that year, specifically 1,073 yards rushing, and this was on 14 games played. So he did miss 2 games, did get 5 touchdowns on the ground. As far as his receiving numbers are concerned, he had 188 yards on 31 receptions and only 1 touchdown. So again, that was a little bit disappointing as well because he was always kind of expected to also be able to be that dual threat running back, catch the ball and be able to run the ball. Now, as far as the touchdown potential, because this is another important stat for all running backs, unfortunately, his touchdown performance has been declining ever since his last year in Miami, because that last season in Miami, he had his highest touchdown performance of his career with 8 touchdowns, and ever since then, those touchdown numbers have been going down because in his first year in Houston, like I said, 5 touchdowns. Then 2017 season, last year, 3 touchdowns on the ground. Now, he did make up for that a little bit on the receiving category last year because he did have 3 receiving touchdowns. Now, speaking of 2017, let's look at those numbers as well because in 2017, he played a full 16 games. He had 888 yards, and the little bit concerning part here was that his attempts went down by 30 because in 2016, he had 268. 2017, he had 238, and the fact of the matter is he still played 2 games more. So this is, definitely a negative trend on both sides on the games played and the attempts throughout the season. So let's look at a couple of factors why this has been the case. Obviously, one of these is the fact that Deshaun Watson went down, and ever since then, that Houston offense just crumbled. Also, there was the factor that D'Onta Foreman was there, and he was vulturing a lot of opportunities for Lamar Miller. Now, I'll get more into Foreman a little bit later, but speaking of the quarterback situation, let me at least give a little bit of defense to Lamar Miller because in 2016, his first year that he joined the Houston Texans, these were the quarterbacks that the Texans had. Brock Osweiler for 14 games, Tom Savage for 2 games. 2017, Tom Savage again with the combination of Deshaun Watson and TJ Yates. So you can pretty much see that as far as the quarterbacks that Miller has played with, Deshaun Watson is by far the best of that group. And when we looked at his season when Deshaun Watson was there, the Texans were putting up ridiculous numbers offensively, and Lamar Miller was getting in on it as well. Now, do I think that those numbers offensively for the Texans will continue once Deshaun Watson comes back? No, I don't. Because you've seen it and you've heard it this year. Deshaun Watson, the trajectory he was on was insane. There's no way that was sustainable as far as touchdown performance. And if you're drafting someone like Deshaun Watson for what he did on a short period of performance, you're going to be disappointed because if that's the case, he should be the number 1 quarterback off the board, which we all know isn't the case. And if you are drafting him like that, please amend that as soon as possible because you are going to be reaching on him like crazy. And there are a lot of other good quarterbacks that you can still have. But getting back to the Lamar Miller situation after getting off track a little bit, the point of all that is now when Deshaun Watson comes back from injury, I really do think that the Texans have found their franchise quarterback. And he's coming off, a serious injury. They're going to want to protect him a little bit. By all means, they have a good offensive football team. They've got DeAndre Hopkins. They've got Will Fuller. Watson showed good chemistry with those guys. But I think they will be a little bit more careful with Watson now. And what's that going to precipitate? Well, instead of maybe staying longer in the pocket and trying to find those wide receivers, he's going to try and dump the ball out to the running back a little bit faster. That's definitely a big bonus for Lamar Miller. And on top of that, instead of making him subject to more hits, maybe the Houston Texans give the ball more to Lamar Miller. Now, all of these things, to me, are a benefit for Miller. On top of that, I mentioned the name D'Onta Foreman because Foreman, the last couple of years, has quietly been taking away good opportunities from Lamar Miller, even when Miller was healthy. And that was the big concerning point. But this year, by all means, Miller is going to start as the primary running back for that team one way or another, just because Foreman suffered that Achilles injury late in the season last year, and that is a very tough injury for running backs to come back from, especially 100%. So basically, Lamar Miller is the unquestioned running back number one, whether he's fully earned it or not. Now, that's a whole nother conversation, but I definitely think that Miller is going to make the most out of this because this is going to be a very interesting Houston team, very potent offense as well from what we saw last year, hopefully. And with all that being said, let's now look at some of his projections, where he's being drafted this year, and kind of break that down as well. A good place to start when evaluating Miller's potential for this 2018 season is by looking at his ADP. Now, the source I'm using here is Fantasy Pros, just because I think they do a really good job of getting multiple data points with this and getting the most accurate averages on all these players that we are considering. Now, specifically for Lamar Miller, he finds himself as the 26th overall running back and the 54th overall player according to Fantasy Pros. So where does that put him? Well, if you are in a 10-person league, that means he is going at the start of the 6th round, and for the majority of us, at least I presume, 12-man leagues, that means right after the end of the 4th round, 48th pick, so 6 picks afterwards, mid-5th round, early 5th round is where Lamar Miller is going. Now, obviously, there are going to be exceptions. People are going to like Lamar Miller more or less than his ADP, which is going to lead to him going maybe a whole round earlier, a whole round later. That always happens, obviously. That's why these are all just projections. But let's look at some of the names that he is being coupled with, because as of right now in these rankings, he's being listed as a running back that's going to finish outside the top 25, which I think is absolutely ludicrous, and there is a lot of value to be exploited here. So some of the names that are above him: Ronald Jones of Tampa Bay, Sony Michel, Mark Ingram, Rashad Penny, Alex Collins, Jay Ajayi, Kenyon Drake, Darius Geis, Derrick Henry, and I'll stop right there because the next name above Henry is Joe Mixon, and I think Mixon is 100% without a doubt going to have a better season than Lamar Miller. But looking at some of those names that I mentioned, Ronald Jones in the situation in Tampa Bay, I think the offense is starting to fall apart a little bit now with the pending Jameis Winston suspension. That's going to hurt Ronald Jones. Sony Michel, well, him in New England, that's a committee in terms of running backs. I wouldn't be surprised if Rex Burkhead is the best running back on that team again. Mark Ingram, well, Mark Ingram has to contend with Alvin Kamara, the one and only, and also with the 4-game suspension. Rashad Penny, sure, he was a first-round pick for the Seattle Seahawks, but he also has to play behind that atrocious Seattle Seahawks offensive line. And it's not like that there isn't competition behind him. Alex Collins, Baltimore, he had, a decent year in 2017, but he was inconsistent. And he is again on that Baltimore offense, which leaves a lot to be desired. Then Jay Ajayi, Kenyon Drake, Darius Geis. Okay, here, I get it. As far as potential goes, I would say it is higher than that of Lamar Miller. Now, looking at the names that are below him, just because if we're going to look at those above, we should also look at those below to see how accurate this is. And, are there some names that maybe should be higher? Because the names below Lamar Miller: Dion Lewis, Carlos Hyde, Tavon Coleman, Tariq Cohen, Royce Freeman, Marlon Mack, just to name a few. Now, Dion Lewis being below him, I understand that. He's with Derrick Henry. I think that's going to be a committee. So for me, that honestly devalues both Dion Lewis and Derrick Henry greatly. And I would almost take a shot on Lamar Miller above both of them. Carlos Hyde, I don't like the situation in Cleveland right now as far as the running backs are concerned. They drafted Chubb in the second round. Then Tavon Coleman. Obviously, Coleman is playing behind Devonta Freeman. Tariq Cohen, he's more of that PPR running back for the Bears, and we still don't know what that Bears offense is going to be. Personally, I'm not sold on it. Royce Freeman, I like Royce Freeman because, I think he's going to be able to separate himself. The only question I have is that Denver offensive line. And then finally, Marlon Mack. Well, Marlon Mack, I love the potential there, so I would almost have Marlon Mack, right around Lamar Miller, if not higher. But regardless of that, my point being is Lamar Miller is surrounded by a boatload of names that I think, if this list is accurate, are going to go before him. And if that is the case, you're going to get exceptional value for Lamar Miller because, like I broke it down, he has more potential than all those guys. He is not the running back number 2 option for the Texans. He isn't a rookie that's just entering the league. He isn't someone that is dealing with a suspension. And he's playing on an offense that has a lot of firepower. All these things right now are reasons why you should like Lamar Miller. On top of that, if we strike out some of those names that I mentioned that are above him, that would put him inside the top 20. If we take out guys like Derrick Henry, maybe Jay Ajayi as well. And if the Texans, I know this is a lot of ifs, but that's how fantasy football is a lot of times. If the Texans do hit on all cylinders offensively, I really believe that Lamar Miller is going to be an integral part. Basically what I'm saying, this is the year. This is the year that Lamar Miller, if there was ever a year, it's now or never, for him to go ahead and have a very good performance statistically and reward all of these fantasy owners. Now, as far as where you should be drafting him, like I said, I think the 5th round, mid-5th round is a good place. At that point in time, you're going to have already 4 players on your roster, probably, either a combination of 2 wide receivers or 2 running backs. Maybe it'll be 3 running backs, 1 wide receiver, something like that, based on your preference. Maybe a tight end in there. I don't know. But looking at some of the players that Lamar Miller finds himself around, obviously there's some names here that I would, target above him based on, again, what I've done earlier. Because obviously someone like Jarvis Landry, whose ADP overall is 50, to me is a very intriguing option PPR-wise. A Golden Tate as well. Maybe you really like Russell Wilson for some reason and want to get a quarterback early. His ADP overall is right at 52. Jimmy Graham is below Lamar Miller at a 55. Tom Brady at a 58. Marvin Jones at a 61. Cam Newton at a 62. Greg Olsen at a 63. So there are some names that, I would also target below Lamar Miller first. But again, the point here being is if you are in search for a flex running back at that point in time, because I think drafting Lamar Miller initially as a running back 2 is a little bit high in terms of the expectations. I do think it could be handled, but I think he fits perfectly right now for a flex option on your team. and then potentially work him up to your running back number 2. Because when it's all said and done, I do expect him to be a little bit more valuable in PPR leagues. Like I said, with Deshaun Watson coming back from injury, I think he's gonna, throw that ball fast and get it out of his hands, short distance to Lamar Miller, whoever is in the backfield. But I do think that'll be Lamar Miller more often than not. And then also, Lamar Miller, he should be the guy favored in the red zone. All these things to me are going to make him a potentially top 15 running back appeal. And if you can get a top 15 running back in the 5th round, maybe at the end of the 5th round, I say you go for it. So with that being said, I definitely will be one of these people that is going to give Lamar Miller one last chance, because like I said, if he doesn't get it done this year, then I concede I don't think he ever will turn things around and return to somewhat of fantasy relevance. But let me know what you guys think. Do you agree? Because I really do think Lamar Miller can be a diamond in the rough for this 2018 season. Let me hear it in the comments section. Are there some things that worry you about him that I didn't mention? Are there some things that have you excited about him that I didn't mention? Or some points that you don't quite agree with? If you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in videos to come.